Welcome to the Worth Listening podcast, where we focus on having positive and productive conversations around money. I'm your host, Lauren, a 4-time Olympian and certified financial planner. On this show, my guests share their money stories. Everyone has a unique story and experiences both wins and losses when it comes to money. My intent is to give listeners something they can relate to, something that builds their courage to be open and take control of their own money story. When I'm not creating a great show for my listeners, I'm running my company, Worth Winning, where I help individuals and families organize their finances. Check us out at worth-winning.com. All right, now on with the show. Welcome back to Financial Literacy Month, where we're talking all things budget for this series. So if you didn't listen to last week's episode, that is where I gave you some tips on what to do if you're struggling in various aspects during this COVID crisis, but also I busted my budget wide open. So if you want to get all up in my financial business, go back and listen to last week's episode. This week, we have our first repeat offender on the podcast. Travis Hornsby came on the show probably about 2 years ago now to talk all things student loans with us. So Travis is the king, by far, hands down, of student loan planning. If you're looking for a strategy for your student loans, he knows what to do. He's constantly reading up on what's happening now, what's the latest, how this is going to affect borrowers. He has an awesome email list that's always giving out tips. And his website is amazing as it pertains to resources if you're looking for help figuring out your student loans. After Travis's episode, I was so blown away by the information that he shared and his personality that I began a conversation with him. And now I am one of 6 consultants that works with Student Loan Planner, where we can change your student loan life in just 60 minutes. And I truly mean that. That's not an advertisement at all. The work has been so rewarding for me because I was already kind of trying to figure out how to best help people with their student loans. But meeting Travis and being able to take advantage of the knowledge he has and know how to best use the resources in student loan planning to help people has been a game changer for the way that I've been able to help others, but then also the way that I run my business. So if you need student loan help, head on over to Student Loan Planner. But that's not what we're talking about today. I just wanted to drop that in there because we're always trying to share. And sharing is caring. We are talking budgets. So we're jumping into Travis's budget today because he retired at the age of 25. So yes, he runs a company, but he works because he wants to, not because he has to. He is a member of something that they call the FIRE movement. So the FIRE acronym stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And it's kind of described as people who are kind of middle income earners, but very ambitious, that are using a formula to create high savings rates. So 50 to 70% of their incomes they're saving. They're doing frugal living. So they are big proponents of minimalism. And then they're pairing that with low cost index investing in order to reach financial independence in a short period of time, usually around 10 years. So these people are getting really aggressive about their saving so that work can become optional in a shorter period of time so they can go out and do the things that they love. You are considered to have reached financial independence the moment that your investments are big enough that they can pay for your expenses for the remainder of your life. So now the choice to work is yours, and that's exactly what Travis has done. So without further ado, let's jump in and learn a little bit more about what Travis has going on. And keep in mind that this was recorded a few weeks ago, but let's dive on in. Travis, it is so good to have you back on the show, a repeat offender. I think you're our first, actually.
Oh, yeah, let's do it.
Today, we are talking all things budget. And I wanted to bring you back because since I've started to work with you, I've learned quite a bit about the FIRE movement. So I was not a big proponent of FIRE prior to meeting you, but you really live this movement and you really help people and encourage people in this way. So I thought who better to have on the podcast to talk about creating a budget that is FIRE oriented than Travis Hornsby himself.
Well, I mean, thank you. I'll say this. I had 2 phases in my life. One was my single phase and then one was my married phase, and my spending looked totally different. When I was single, I was all about that. I'm going to live on 15 grand a year. And I lived in a semi-finished basement. some of my buddies from work and stuff, because I could pay $300 a month and it included utilities. And so I also had a paid off car that I drove that had a leaky sunroof. And I exclusively shopped at Goodwill. 23-year-old Trav, he was hardcore.
Okay, let's just pause for a second. So 23-year-old Trav, how old are you now, Travis?
So I'm 30.
Ooh, so 7 years. What a difference 7 years make.
I know. Oh yeah. I mean, I tell you, get in a relationship, it changes your your trajectory if you're an extremely frugal person.
So you're trying to tell me your wife was not okay with living in the basement on $15,000 a year with you?
No, that definitely cost me quite a bit socially, but that's okay. I'm past that now. And so with budgeting, it's kind of been interesting. I've actually never budgeted in my entire life.
Mm.
Instead of budgeting, I kind of just look at what are my values and how do I reflect that with what I spend. When I was younger, my values would be extremely cheap on everything.
What was the reason behind the being cheap on everything? Why was it important to you to even be cheap versus to live your best life right now, or YOLO and these terms that other people are using and spending every dollar they got?
Probably two reasons. Like the first reason is my granddad was the biggest influence in my life, and he was survived the Depression and watched his family's farm get seized, and they had to find a new place to live for like 10 people. And that experience for him was extremely traumatic. And he would go through the field one day, like him and his brothers stole some watermelons because they were rotting in the field because their neighbor couldn't get anybody to buy them for 5 cents a watermelon.
Wow.
So think about how they're like, what, $5 today, right? $10 at Whole Foods. Just kidding. But they're expensive and nobody had the money to buy them for a nickel. They took some of the watermelons for 5 cents and my great grandfather just spanked him really bad and said, "You're going to go work that off with the farmer. Like you never steal no matter what,
Yeah.
It was just a different time. And going through a depression, I think forever destroys your feeling of that you can spend money. I think that it just totally wipes that away because you had banks fail, you had people's life savings wiped out. My great grandfather was paid as an IOU. He was a principal teacher at this small school, and he got an IOU instead of a paycheck from the county because the county didn't have any property taxes, so they couldn't afford to pay their teachers. But then the county would not accept that same script as a credit to property taxes. So between that and the bank, they foreclosed on his house. You could sell that script. You could sell it to investors. That investors were only paying like 30 cents on the dollar.
Unbelievable.
So that kind of experience, I saw that from him. That was a long time ago, right? I was born a lot more recently than the Great Depression, right?
Right. So yeah, how did that rub off on you?
So my dad was a teacher. My mom stayed home with us and didn't work after some complications. She had given birth to one of my brothers. We didn't really have that much money. At least it didn't feel like that. They were always kind of living, not paycheck to paycheck, because they did have some savings, like back from when my mom worked. But in terms of like the cash flow month to month, they were barely saving anything. No retirement savings. Everything that was coming in was pretty much getting spent. Now, they had those savings from a long time ago that they had kept. When I was in high school, when I was coming of age, they started spending that money down to where there was like nothing left.
Right. 3 boys that you got to feed that are hungry all the time.
Yeah. So like we had no money. And whenever we would go out to eat, my mom would always be like, "You're not allowed to get sweet tea." If you grew up in the South, like sweet tea's everything.
It's everything.
And we would go to this restaurant called Po Folks. I don't know if you've heard of it before, but it was this great restaurant because whenever I would get like a popcorn salad for like $6.95, I would feel like the best thing in the world because I was like never allowed to get expensive stuff going out to eat. I'd always have to say I was a kid through 14 or something. Yeah, I'm just joking around a little bit, but we didn't have a lot of money. And then my parents actually had to take a loan for me when I was a high school student because they didn't have enough money to pay for something in a given month. They'd exhausted their savings. And so they were pretty embarrassed about it. And so I had just saved up money working like odd jobs. I worked security at a church, making money however I could. And that was a really intense experience, right? It's like just feeling like I had no money and then just going to school, got a scholarship luckily. And I guess that's why I was super cheap. It's just because my granddad, I spent so much time with him that he kind of made me feel like the next depression was going to come around the corner. And then living with my parents, watching it being so kind of month to month, I just felt like we never had enough to really go off and spend money on something. It was always like, can we afford this? Probably not. We're going to have to skip it.
So you've had pretty astute awareness of your finances your whole life, from your grandfather to your parents to even getting into college. Like by that time, your money message had been shaped and it was very much like the value of a dollar is important and I can't waste any of these dollars. And saving was ingrained in you, it sounds like.
Well, I didn't understand investing until I was probably like 20. I didn't understand compound interest and things like that. I wish I had understood that a little bit earlier in my life. When I did finally understand it, then it was like, wow, I'm already extremely frugal just as by nature. And now this sandwich I want to buy for $10 from the artisanal sandwich shop, now it's $100 in 20 years from now or 30 years from now. So I can't spend that because that's like spending $100 on a sandwich.
Right.
I really started thinking like that on everything. There was times I was a pretty miserable person. Like I still entertained myself. Like I would treat myself to Slurpees at the gas station. When I had a good test or something, I'd go out and I'd buy a $1.49 big gulp Slurpee, and then I would go sit and proctor tests to make some more money on this. So like, I guess I was just an extreme frugal person throughout my early life. And then I moved to the big city. And probably the first couple of years I was up there, it was a little like uneventful. Like I wasn't really having as much fun. I wasn't really feeling super happy about everything. And so I was like, well, maybe I'll make a change. Maybe I'll go down and live downtown, even though that's not rational from a money perspective. I'm going to go do that because it'll be more fun. Right.
So is this pre-college or is this during college?
This is after college. So I went to college. I actually came out with low to mid 5 figures of assets out of college instead of being in debt just because of the side hustles and the work and scholarships and stuff like that. So, I mean, I got really lucky.
I'd say beyond lucky. So a college student, graduate, no student loan debt, no credit card debt. But not only that, you had money in the bank.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of unfair. Like you were an NCAA athlete and I had some friends that were. And I said, what's kind of ridiculous is schools allow us to stack scholarships if you get non-athletic scholarships. But if you get athletic scholarships, if you get an extra $100, somebody lets you skip the line at the nightclub or something, like you could get in trouble,
Yeah.
I was like, how ridiculous is that? Because I actually got over the cost of attendance because the scholarships could be stacked. So basically they didn't check to see like, did you already meet the cost of attendance? If so, we're going to offset this scholarship against another one, right? So I ended up getting multiple scholarships from multiple places and then got refunded $5,000 or so on top of like room board tuition per year, maybe.
That is the way to go to college. Get paid to go to school. This is a great one.
Yeah, you can only do that if you have like, I wasn't at Harvard either, right? I was at University of Florida. Like you have to go to a place where your scores put you above the median for whatever skill set you have, right? So like if you're the best tuba player ever and you go to some kind of so-so school, maybe you'll get a huge scholarship for that. I don't know. Like if your SAT scores are a certain level, if you go to a place where you're like the median student, you're not going to get very good scholarships. But if you go to a place where you're one of the quote unquote star students relative to the median, then you might get a lot of scholarships for that, right? And then just knowing that you can apply around and get extra money, that was something that I was desperate for because I had 2 brothers and my parents had no money. And my mom made an error on her FAFSA form and put a bunch of numbers in the wrong place and I didn't get any financial aid.
Yikes.
You know how retirement and home is supposed to go into like a bucket that doesn't count against you for financial aid? She put that on her form as if we had that in cash.
Oh.
All that stuff counted against us.
And there were no do-overs.
She did it for the first year and she did it wrong and she didn't get any aid. And so she just didn't submit it the next year. So I just wonder how many people do that and don't get help.
Yeah, and get really frustrated. It's not the easiest form for sure. So it sounds like we just given a lot of hacks to somebody who might be in high school right now and has read about the FIRE movement and wants to get started. And you're not earning a lot of money in high school, but the strategy you just described for college is really getting you started on the right track to become a good proponent or a good member of the FIRE movement. Okay, so let's talk about after college. You're single, you live in a basement. Did you do a lot of reading on the FIRE movement and that was like something you wanted to do, or you're just being frugal because you wanted to be frugal? How did that transition into where you are now and how you're managing your budget?
I was just frugal because I was just naturally frugal because of those influences that I mentioned. But the thing is I had that paired with a dissatisfaction with my job. So I basically was going to become a professor. That was my goal. So I would have been great at the making corny jokes and entertaining people in class part, but I was going to be really bad at the research part because I'm not a heads down, like let's focus on abstract math and actually get these projects completed kind of a person. It's just not my personality. I like to do quick hit things and try to find correlations or things that I think are true and just run with it. I didn't do that well in some of the coursework for abstract math to get into like economics PhD programs. So I thought, well, I like investing. I like finance, partly because of my granddad's influence. It's just an interesting thing to read about for me. So I thought, okay, well, maybe get a job. So I graduated college, right? Loved Vanguard. So I like published on some message board that I wanted a job at Vanguard, and like one of their officers reached out and like I got a job that way.
So it's like LinkedIn before LinkedIn.
It was just like a message board basically. So I was excited because I finally got to work at my dream company. The problem was is I was just not a big company kind of guy. I would have had the same experience, I think probably even a worse experience working at another big company that I didn't have that mission and values alignment with, because I had that with Vanguard. It was more just as a big company, and big companies have certain processes and rules and procedures and people management stuff that makes them a successful big company, but makes it hard for certain kinds of people to fit in. And so for me, I was just kind of like sad, like not feeling like I had made the right decision long term, like being in a big company environment. And I was just trying to figure out what do I do about it. And so I was sitting there in 2012, 2013 with maybe 50,000 to my name, and which is pretty good for a recent college grad. And I was already saving and investing a lot. And I was kind of like, well, what are my options? What can I do? And then I discovered the FIRE movement, reading blogs like Mr. Money Mustache. And that stuff just kind of connected with me. Like his style of writing was just on point for me, feeling like I didn't have a passion for showing up to work and just feeling like I was losing my 20s doing something that was just sort of watching the clock. And maybe some people can relate. And so I decided from that point that I was going to focus on this FIRE movement and trying to save and invest to not have to work one day.
All right. So let's talk about some of the things that happened as it pertains to you having discovered that. So FIRE movement is big on lowering your expenses and then also getting really, really aggressive about your savings. So tell us about some of the expenses that you had or some of the hacks that you had that kept your expenses low.
I know. So I'm going to do some math here. So I actually wrote a book about it. It's called 25 is the New 65, How to Retire Outrageously Early and Do Whatever the Heck You Want. It's on Amazon for 99 cents. If I could set it for free, I would. So basically, some of the hacks, this is kind of embarrassing, but I'm going to say it anyway. So one of the hacks is when you go to a bar, right, you don't want to look like you're that guy that like doesn't drink at all to make all your friends feel uncomfortable, right? So what you do is you take out a couple ones and then you ask for water with lime at the bar, better yet, soda water with lime. And they usually don't charge you for that because they just assume that you're the DD. And so you slide that $1 over, $2 over, $1 a drink is kind of typical, right? So you slide over $1 or $2 and you don't look like you're a loser that doesn't tip. But then you get the lime in your drink. So everybody assumes, especially if it's soda water, that you got like a vodka soda or vodka tonic or something.
Right.
And so then you just act drunk instead of actually being drunk. And then you save the spread on that tip plus the tax and the cost of the drink. So at a nice bar, the bartender just cares about getting tipped. They don't care about the sales are, right? So the owner isn't present in that transaction. And so you don't have to feel awkward about it. So I would do that all the time. And I would go out plenty and save like 90% less expenses compared to my buddies that I'd go out with, just because I'd be ordering the soda waters with lime. And one time somebody stopped me and they're like, Travis, you cannot drive home. Do not drive home right now. And I was like, you don't understand. Like, I didn't have anything to drink. And they're like, no, you're wasted right now. And so, no, actually, I'm not. Like, I don't know. So that's one hack. It's not a good hack, though, because really people don't really spend that much money on food and drink, really. I'll show some numbers later to show why that is. But I was extremely frugal with housing, and my car was paid off because I had a cheap car. So I had a cheap car, $300 a month in rent. I ate Subway sandwiches and carrots and blocks of cheese at work that I would bring.
But this is after college. So generally people are like, okay, I can do the little jalopy car in high school, maybe even through college. My parents got me, but you're now working full time and you still decided to keep the cheap beat up jalopy car.
Well, I was single, right? And I guess there was a reason I was single, I don't know. But my thought process with that was like, well, anybody that I can attract anyway is somebody that actually likes me for me instead of what image I can put forward. That worked for a little bit of a time. My wife and I, one of our first dates was at Chipotle and asked her to share a burrito bowl because I was trying to save money. So that shows you how extreme I was.
But she married you.
But she did. Now, there was a woman that I invited to a date at Wendy's and she didn't go. So there's definitely some dark past that I have that I'm spilling my guts on this show. So I hope the listeners appreciate that. It's a little embarrassing.
Definitely. So what else from a standpoint of budgeting? Maybe we'll skip to the budget now because you did make it to a point where you were able to retire early, quote unquote. Like, you don't need to work right now. Is that correct?
I would if I needed to provide a standard of living consistent with what my wife prefers, but no, if it's what I prefer, would be the short answer to that.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. So, in thinking about how you're organizing your monthly budget now, tell us a little bit about how you're managing your expenses.
Sure. Well, so just fast forward, right? So, for the listeners that don't know, I retired from my job at 25. I traveled for a while, met my wife right before I left, after I bought the plane ticket and planned everything. She was in medicine. She has a very rigid schedule, very rigid location where she needs to be at what times. So my travel habit didn't compute well with her job requirements. So I had to decide, like, do I want to be a nomad and not be with her, or be with her and not be a nomad? So I made that second decision. We got married. She's Asian American. My father-in-law grew up in China. And he basically was like, hey, this no job thing doesn't fly. You got to get a job or else I'm not coming to the wedding. That was what happened. So like I had this student loan thing that I was doing because I was a bond trader. I had Excel skills and I built all these models, help people, then started a business. And I say that because it's going to make the budget stuff make more sense.
Yeah, for sure.
When I didn't have a lot of income, I was watching all my money like a hawk because I had no income when I was early retired. So I was trying to keep my cash burn down to like almost nothing. So I would think in my head, I got $50 that I can spend today.
Right.
When I was traveling or doing anything really. And any kind of surplus, I mentally put it forward to the next day so that I would be able to spend that money activity that I really wanted to do that didn't fit into that $50 a day budget.
I think you bring up a good point too about the FIRE movement. It's like you said, the idea is that you get your expenses really low and then you save some number of that. Usually it's like 25 times what it is that are your expenses. And then you live off of that. So you were retired, but you were retired based on this really low expenses. So like you were saying, like this $50 a day, there's a standard of living that you had to hold yourself to and be accountable to if you really never wanted to run out of money.
Right. Because you only need 400 grand to be able to retire on $50 a day. And that's doable because I grew up on the Gulf Coast, right? So I knew that the Mississippi, like Delta area, you could rent a nice house for almost nothing, $200, $300 a month. So that was like my backup plan. If I like just get so frustrated with work, I'm just going to move to like one of these nice communities in Mississippi where it's dirt cheap, get a Wi-Fi connection, and I'm good. You know, I could get good food. That was kind of my plan. But then I got married and the expenses and the desired lifestyle went way up. And the thing is that was hard for me because I'm a very frugal person and going out to nice restaurants used to make me nauseous because I would be thinking about getting the bill. Spending more money on rent used to make me have severe anxiety because I was worried about just having so much money coming out of my bank account that could have been going to other things. But I realized that it's better to think in terms of having enough and not hoarding wealth. And I think that there is a balance where you can be ready for the next Great Depression without constantly dwelling on it. So that's kind of what I decided my theory was going to be. My granddad, when he passed away, like had a lot more than he needed that he could have and should have probably enjoyed during his life. So getting into the budget, right? Because that's what you asked. On average, I think I spent around $14,000 a month in 2019, not including taxes. It does include giving, which is a relatively larger percentage of that, maybe just because my wife's super into like the idea of tithing and donating and doing that kind of thing. So that's another thing that's really nice for marrying my wife is that she is generous. And my default prior to meeting her was not being generous because I was super cheap.
Let's pause there for a second and talk about like the discussions that the two of you had to have because you came from super frugal mindset and she came from a different mindset and you merging those two things and you seeing the better of it and saying like, yeah, this is a worthwhile thing and we can afford to give. We are blessed in abundance so that we can go ahead and do this. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that if you got your emergency fund and you got money in your retirement and you're maxing your retirement and you're putting plenty of money away to mutual funds and stuff like that, then you kind of already have enough. And you'll eventually hit that point of financial independence. And so it's kind of like once you get to that point, if you don't like what you're doing, you should make a change. Even if it means having a couple of years off from making a taxable income. I tell people like I have this 1+5 rule. You want 1 times your annual expenses in the bank plus 5 times your annual expenses in assets of some sort, retirement, brokerage account, whatever. And that gives you enough escape velocity to do anything. So it's kind of like if you're being held back by gravity, you're not going to be able to get that rocket to take off, right? So people's gravity for their personal finances is all the debt, all the anxiety, all of the bills. right? That they have to pay. And if they don't have the income to pay them, they're stuck. If you can get enough cushion so that you have at least a couple of years just to kind of figure your life out or figure out whatever is ailing you. Because for me, I think it was mental health related. Like I was just depressed. I was doing this work that I just didn't feel like my talents were being well used. And I felt like I wasn't really having a big impact on people. And it was hard. A lot of people go through a lot worse than that. So it might sound stupid to say it was hard, but it was hard for me.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I would suggest in terms of giving is like, once you get to that point where you're okay, then loosen up the purse strings a little bit. Because there's a lot of people out there that need a lot of help. And some of the things that we're passionate about giving to, I mean, our church, I volunteered at a school in St. Louis, very high need. We're able to give some stuff to them. So that was pretty cool. We, some sort of, I don't want to call them silly things, but fun things like fundraisers for the zoo and for the art museum and stuff like that.
So all sorts of things that you had that align with your values and your goals. I think that was something you brought up earlier. Like you can give in the way that you're passionate about because you have the ability to do so. Yeah,
like one of them too, this family from our church, they're like missionaries. Like he's a pilot and he had this idea of going to this remote area of the world where most people like don't have access to roads. And so he flies in to medevac them basically and lands on the river, gets all these people that are like dying of various ailments that might not survive and takes them to the capital days faster than they could by other methods and saves their life and stuff. And so that's pretty cool. Like, so he goes from flying around private jet company or something, corporate executives, to going feeling like he's having this transformational impact on their lives. That's a cool thing to be able to fund, because it's like, I felt what it was like to not feel fulfilled, but now I can help give to help other people feel fulfilled. That's going to allow them to give more of themselves to others. And once you are operating from that position of having enough, the good news is like, I know that those frugal bones in me still exist, right? So if Great Depression comes back, I'm pretty sure that ultra frugal cheapo Trav can come back.
He's still in there.
With a vengeance, right? So if you can train yourself how to be ultra frugal, then you can like lay down that law again if you have to. If we had a Great Depression, I'm probably putting somebody in their guest bedroom. My wife's not going to like it, but too bad. We're going to go back to shopping at Goodwill. No more buying clothes. We're going to go back to shopping at Aldi's, planning out $2 a meal. Has COVID crisis given you some of that anxiety? Do you feel like we're headed toward the Great Depression? Oh, yeah. We would have been without any kind of assistance from the government. I mean, I actually have been thinking about this a lot lately because in the past, like the Spanish flu epidemic, we had 700,000 people die in the US, but we didn't have the economy crash. And the reason is because people just kept doing what they were doing and didn't rely on the government, but a lot more people died. So it's this kind of thing where like the government trying to save lives, like thank goodness that they're getting involved heavily financially, because they would have created I would say, a crisis that's also horrible if they hadn't gotten involved at all. Because, 3 million people being out of work with 1 week, that's like the worst by orders of magnitude ever. And I definitely have some of that anxiety. I mean, like, thank goodness we have a lot in cash. Like, I don't think about cash as a percentage of my portfolio. I think of cash as like having enough to not feel anxious. To me, I don't really care how much it is as a percentage of my portfolio. I'm like, does this amount make me feel safe or not? And if it doesn't, then I jack the cash up a lot more. Right now, I'm not feeling safe like most people are. And business is taking a big hit because 0% interest means nobody's refinancing unless you have private loans. And $0 a month payments. The crazy thing about this, Lauren, is people are making so many bad mistakes, like they usually are. The problem is $0 a month payments makes them think that it's not a problem. A lot of people are going to ignore that, and they're going to ignore their student loans because they have other things in their life they're worried about right now. And the student loan problems are going to stay there and probably will be really busy in September or October when this thing starts back up again. Probably the busiest we've ever been, would be my guess. But the point in between that means a lot less revenue. So as a business owner, it's a really, really challenging time. So props to anybody out there who's a business owner dealing with keeping people employed through this. And also, obviously, the healthcare people that are being exposed to this. I think this speaks to the point of having some awareness around your spending is so important, and why I chose to do budgeting for Financial Literacy Month in the midst of all this crisis, because a lot of people got caught with their pants down. And I think this is the time where we show compassion to those people, but we also need to give tools and resources so that
you don't end up in a situation where there's zero savings at the time this hits, because even people with a lot of savings, like you said, are feeling this. So most of America has no savings, and this can be a really big deal. But giving them the tools to be able to say, okay, well, I've never had a budget before, but like I got time on my hands, I'm at home, let's get this budget together, is a really important thing to be able to offer people.
So I thought I would just break down real quick, like my spending by category, because I think that might be kind of interesting.
Yeah, let's do that.
So I'll exclude the giving. That's probably about 30% of our spending. That's a rough estimate. Maybe something around those. That's a big part of it. But the next part is sort of the just for fun category. Like this is like clothing, gifts to family and friends. So that's like probably like $3,000 a month, stuff that we could definitely cut 100% of it without having problems. And then, so this is kind of funny. I didn't realize this, but we spend more money on food than we do housing.
Uh-oh.
So, oops. We spend about $1,500 a month going out to eat, and then maybe about $300 a month on groceries on average. We're pretty bad when it comes to food expenses. But the thing about that, though, is I know that we really couldn't spend that much more than that, even if we tried. There's only so many dishes you can eat before you get super fat or like your liver fails. You physically cannot eat more than a certain amount. Whenever we do go to these fancier restaurants and stuff, like, yeah, I could eat a lot more because they give you 1P or something and it's a course. I feel like that dining out expense, that could be cut 100% if we had to. But it's just something that we both enjoy. I hate cooking. Cooking to me is like the worst thing ever. My brother's a food blogger, actually. I'm the financial blogger, right? So my brother got like a perfect SAT score or something, and he like quit his job as an engineer to become an actor and a food blogger.
This Hornsby family is rebels.
Yeah, we don't like listening. You know, my other brother is like an entertainer at Disney World. We're a weird group.
There's somebody listening going, you crazy millennials, go get a job, work, get your pension, sit down somewhere.
Yeah, and we're like, screw that. I'm going to be a food blogger and I'm going to be a singer. Like, and I'm going to run a blog, a student loan blog. So housing for us was around like $1,500 a month. So we're in St. Louis. It's a really cheap place. You can get a really nice apartment for like a fairly cheap amount. I've actually wanted to increase that a lot because there's this new gorgeous building that's gone up next to us. And I thought, well, you know, we can afford it. And it would be really fun to have like a bigger space, a nicer view, nice gym in the building. So my wife doesn't have to walk over to the one that's across the neighborhood or something. But she's kind of been the one vetoing that. So that's kind of funny.
Interesting. Talk about how you would rework your budget if you did take on the bigger expense. You know, like you said, there's kind of like a finite amount of the spending here. I'm assuming that the rest of it is going to saving. You don't want to save less and increase expenses. So you would have to rework something within these expenses in order to be able to afford that.
Well, so it depends. So if you earn a fixed amount of money, then you do have to rework something when you spend more in one category versus another, right? So you would have to take that out of investments or giving for most people, right? So what we would probably do is take it out of investments because we're saving more than enough. If we want to enjoy a little bit nicer place, why not? If you can afford it. And if you like what you're doing, that's kind of my test for things is if you get to that level of having relative financial security, that 1+5 thing, and then on top of that, you're enjoying your job, then it's okay to take on more expenses. But if you're not enjoying your job, definitely don't take on a big rent or mortgage expense. It's going to make you stuck even more than you already are.
Yeah. Also, you said you were renting. You're not talking about moving from one place to the next. You're not a homeowner.
No, never been a homeowner.
Do you have any desire to be a homeowner? Tell us some thoughts about home ownership.
Owning a home to me is kind of like, do you want to go skydiving or something? I don't know. Like, I guess if the person's like super experienced and it's a good deal, then maybe, but I don't have this burning desire. Everybody that talks about home ownership, it's like, oh, it's the best thing ever. Well, that's people that don't know how to invest. People that don't know how to invest, they go out and they buy like the max house they can because they know they'll probably stay there for 20 years and then they'll have a positive asset, but they didn't put any money into retirement or investments or mutual funds or anything like that. For us, if we're putting tons of money away in those investments, why do we need to own a home? Especially if we're not going to be somewhere for 5 years. So, I mean, I don't know if we're going to be here for 5 years or 1 year or 10 years. I don't know. If we had gone back in time, we should have bought a house because we ended up probably staying here for 5 years. But I can't go back in time and I didn't really lose that much money. So I'm not that worried about it.
Because savings rate was more important than the actual what might have been lost in the past with the home ownership.
Nobody gets rich from owning a house unless it's like a once in a generation kind of thing. unless you're like a homeowner in Seattle in like 2000 and then Amazon gets founded and becomes the world's most valuable company. Yeah, your house might make you rich. That's super unusual. And then when you're buying a house in a place like Seattle where the prices are already really high, it's even harder to make that become something that makes you rich. The problem with California, and all those like really expensive markets is the housing prices go really, really high. And then people become homeowners and they like ferociously defend the value of their homes with all these restrictions to prevent affordable housing and stuff like that, because they don't want to watch the value of their giantly overpriced asset fall by half. So my suggestion is like, if you're in one of those cities, just like don't play the game versus trying to jump in and try to buy something that's ridiculously expensive.
What about your rule of thumb overall with home ownership? I know you share this with your readers of your email list quite a bit. If you want to purchase a home, how much house can you afford generally as a rule of thumb?
We tell people to 2 times your income, household income, limit it to less than that, and make it the household income that you desire versus what your income is. So if one of you wants to take a step back, if one of you wants to work part-time or take a lower paying job because you're more passionate about it, take that new income and multiply it by 2, and that's the house you can buy. And if you don't find something that you like for that you want to spend 20% of your income on housing. So that's really hard for lower income families. Like I get that. For middle class and above families, you can pretty much follow that rule. For lower income families, honestly, like the smartest thing to do is just to try to raise your income.
I like it. If you can't lower expenses, then you've got to raise income.
Yeah. I mean, that's the most transformational thing that's ever happened to me in my life. Our profit for the next 6 months is probably going to be flat to negative. Before that, we were having some of our best months ever in the business. And it was like the amount of effort I put in and how hard I worked, it was not really necessarily correlated to how much money we were making. And it's kind of like that when you build a business versus just like a solopreneur. Solopreneur, you got to go out and do all the work and do everything to make the money. But when you build something, whatever it is, you can kind of grow your income and then like cutting the spending doesn't become quite as important as just making sure that your spending is reasonable.
And that your savings rate is intact.
Right, exactly. So we spent like $14,000 on like transportation last year. The vast majority of that was flights. I'm kind of looking at our budget, like out of the $14,000, about $10,000 was flights.
So pretty low cost for at home local travel than cars and stuff.
Yeah, because we have paid off car and it's a 2012. And so there was some maintenance, some problems. We had to get new tires, had to get it fixed up a little bit, but a cheaper, older car, insurance is less, and we don't drive a ton.
Do you have any thoughts on owning a car, with debt or paying on a car note? What are your rules of thumb as it pertains to car ownership?
This is going to be maybe a statement that wouldn't be true for some people, but like, I think anybody can buy a car that runs within like a 5-mile radius. Outside of like, expensive housing areas like Seattle or San Francisco, you can probably live within 5 miles of your job. And you can probably get there without having to take the freeway, right? So that means that you can buy a $2,000 Honda Civic with 200,000 miles on it that's going to run okay, and you can pay cash for that. If you can't get to $2,000 in the bank, you take out a loan. But all those places that advertise on the radio, like they are just killing people with excessive charges, high marked up vehicles, high interest loans. These places advertise heavily to low income people, and they tell you, bad credit, no problem, because they want you to put it on credit, because then they can just go seize the car if you don't pay. And when you were paying, they're making all this money and profit off of the interest. I just feel like the car industry is just designed for lower income people to blow themselves up. And it's designed for higher income people to lull themselves into a false sense of security that they're not making bad decisions. I mean, I would just say like, go buy a $2,000 Honda that's paid off until you can afford to pay cash for something better. And guess what? If you're like, wow, this isn't a safe car, then you're going to be really motivated to cut spending to save enough money to get something that's nicer. That happened to us. Like we bought the $2,000 Honda. My wife's like, this thing's awful on the interstate. I don't feel safe at all. We're buying something immediately. I don't care. Luckily, we had some savings. And so I sold the $2,000 Honda for $2,000 because once it's down to $2,000, there's no depreciation. And then I bought the $6,000 Nissan Altima. And I think our next trade is going to be to sell the Nissan Altima and buy some nice car in like the $15,000 range that's used with, a couple of years old versus wasting money on a new car.
But still paying cash for it. Yeah.
Right.
All right. You have given a lot of hacks, tips, and tricks for a budget. I think that the listeners will be really, really excited to listen to this episode and take in all that you have shared. Do you have any last things that you want to share as it pertains to Financial Literacy Month, budgeting? Give us some more gems.
Well, I would say if you don't have student loan debt, work with Lauren with her business, being a financial planner. That's like a super valuable thing to have is financial peace. And you don't realize this, but you really need help if you're going to get there, because if you're not there already, then you telling yourself you're going to get there is probably not going to happen without some sort of external help, right? It's kind of like if you've been saying you're going to lose weight for forever, but you haven't done it, well, guess what? You probably need to hire a personal trainer. And then if you do have student loans, check out me and Lauren at studentloanplanner.com. And we'd love to make a plan for you, save some money.
Travis, thank you so much for being a repeat offender. This was an awesome episode. I look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you, Lauren.
All righty. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Travis Hornsby of Student Loan Planner. As part of Financial Literacy Month, one of the things I want to make you guys aware of is that I am offering my course for free. Free $99, which is a really big deal because I spent a bunch of time on that course and I feel like it's very, very valuable. But in this COVID-19 times, I feel like there's a lot of people that are, one, at home with lots to do, but then two, that have been kind of caught off guard financially by the world actually shutting down. So if you're looking to take steps to better your financial future and you've got the time on your hands, you can find the link to my course in the show notes, and I hope that it helps you get yourself on track. Overall, in the world, we have a spending problem. The increase of stuff is something that we're hearing all the time in various marketing streams. Get more, buy more, save now, discount, etc. But as we accumulate more things, we're now having to figure out where to put all the stuff. The average home size has increased 23% in the last 2 decades. And of course, the number of storage facilities has also doubled. I say all that to kind of inquire and ask, what can you get rid of? What do you have too much of? As we acquire more things and feel like we need more space, then we want a bigger house. Then we need a bigger car. We need a bigger this. We need a bigger that. What in life can you simplify right now? Spring cleaning is happening. We've got a lot more times on our hands because we're staying at home. So how can you simplify your life? While people who subscribe to the FIRE movement are saving more than the average person, by doing so, they're also not purchasing as much as the average person. But you'll hear them frequently say that they don't feel deprived at all. In fact, one of the core values is placing emphasis on spending on the things that truly make you the happiest and cutting out the things that don't add value to your life. So walk around the house today and see what is truly not adding value. Look at your bills and the monthly reoccurring expenses and say, what is truly not adding value? And where can I simplify and get rid of some things? You don't have to live a FIRE type life. We don't have to save 50 to 70% of our income. But what if you could find an additional 5% to save right now by simply getting rid of those things that are not adding value to your life? As always, if you have questions or suggestions for guests, don't hesitate to reach out. You can find us at worth-listening.com.